Well, we're right below Last Days of Autumn, right?
Yeah.
Kind of love it down
Why
here.
did you say that and then ask me like you weren't sure?
I wasn't sure.
This is going terribly. We're keeping this one, though. This is like our 18th take or something.
That's fine. Got to start somewhere.
Got to start somewhere. Hey, that is a perfect segue to what today's episode is about. We have a great guest lined up for the episode today. His name is Houston Kress. He does sports radio here in Knoxville. He is on a station called Fanrun Radio. His path to where he is now is not the typical path. It started out kind of as an independent thing from a Twitter account. That kind of blew up, gained a lot of independent organic growth, and that was able to get him a position hosting his own show on sports radio.
And we get into just going from 0 to 1 for anyone. It's not just sports radio, obviously. We talk about your start with Knoxville Music Warehouse and many other starts, and how sometimes it's not a clear path of how you're going to make money doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
But
sometimes you can't see the path that you're setting out on, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't set out and start and try and take it. So one of the reasons that we chose Houston for episode 1, partly because his story lines up so well with the theme of the first episode that we wanted to do, because we're just starting this podcast. It's not something that we did one time when we started a business. It's a thing that we continue to try to do every so often. So we're just starting this podcast, and we're talking about just starting for whatever it is that you want to just start. The other reason why we wanted to get him is because he's a radio guy. Good at the talking.
definitely better than us.
We found out, so it was kind of a double-edged sword. We found out that he's really good, and then when you put the two of us up next to somebody who's really good for our first time interviewing, not that good. We don't talk the good talks.
Talks good, not our strong.
Yeah. But we're going to get better. This is our first episode.
We are getting better, I think.
Yeah, and I think it was honestly fine. I just am very now insecure about placeholders and certain words that I say very, very often.
So
hopefully
pay attention in this.
Please disregard that. Don't pay attention.
Turn it into a drinking game if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay. What you had other things you wanted to?
No, I think we're ready to
episode?
get into it. I mean, Houston's our star. Let's give him some time.
Well, I've actually got more. I wanted to say just real quick.
That makes sense.
Stick in it till the end. I mean, we go through a long part of his journey, and all that stuff is going to provide context to the stuff that we're talking about, kind of in the second half hour, and all that is where the real nuggets come in. And I want to say real quick too, Houston references a couple times working in New York, and we didn't really provide proper context for that because he and I have known each other for years. He and I went to Plattsburgh, New York. It's way upstate. It's on the Canadian border. We worked for about 4 months building wind turbines, and got back. We were working anywhere between 60 to 80 hours a week. We were pocketing our per diems, got a lot of overtime. We came back with money saved up, and we're like, now what? And that's when he started Vol Rumor Mill. It's when I started Knoxville Music Warehouse. And, there will be another lesson for that. I think we'll probably do a whole other episode on ways bands can fund themselves while they're getting started. But we'll get into that at a later date. So I just wanted to mention that at the top so it wasn't super confusing when you heard him referencing working in New York.
Do you want to get into, real quick before we start, you want to just mention some stuff we got coming down the pipeline?
Oh, yeah, plugs. We got a plug.
Plug it away.
Go for it.
Plug it up. Well, we've got all sorts of great festivals coming up. I'm nervous to say the festival simply because we don't know if the dates are going to move.
Yeah, we're currently recording this podcast in the height of coronavirus spread, and we're keeping a very close eye on everything we're doing.
It's a stressful time for everyone, but the event industry in particular, as we jockey for new dates and try to make scheduling work and things like that. But
depending on the release schedule, we may do a full episode on that. But
yeah,
in the event
true.
that these events don't get canceled, we have Heart of Town Fest coming up on Saturday, May 9th.
That's true.
We've got Southern Skies Fest coming up on Saturday, May 16th. We've got a bunch of shows coming up at Pretentious, Jill Andrews, Gangsta Grass, The Foxies, and several more. So check out bornandraisedknox.com for more information.
All right, let's get to it.
So before we get into anything that we wanted to talk about that's relevant to somebody interested in a path of entrepreneurship or music as a career, we're going to talk about things. People may be wondering why we have a sports radio host on the first episode of a podcast about music.
I myself was wondering that.
Good.
Actually.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I get to inform you at the same time as our listeners. So there are lessons to be learned in any kind of creative venture, in any kind of path that anyone's taken on their career. You can draw different good pieces of advice from many different kinds of places, and your story to entering sports radio, I think, is a really good one and has a lot of really good lessons in it. But before we get into any of all that, I want to talk about your other connection to music.
Oh, man.
Which is you and I used to be in a band together.
Yes, we did. We did.
Called Hootie and the Brofish.
I still want a reunion because I never got to really experience that band.
We talk about it all the time.
What would it take?
We are so spread across the country now. That reunion tour would be, the ticket price would be astronomical to pay for travel costs.
Yeah, Houston and I are here in Knoxville. Tim and Cody are in Nashville. Luke is in San Diego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I was going to just lob it to California, but San Diego, yes.
And a lot of this, since you were so kind to come here and give us your time, is us going to just be, showering you with praises. So Houston was the most talented one in the band. That's why we named the band after him.
I'm not sure.
I've
got a 3 o'clock.
Listen, I know that sounds like praise, but I don't know if that is praise.
That's fair enough.
You would have to have at least some context to the rest of the band's
right?
abilities.
Yeah, the rest of us not all that talented. Houston / Hootie, some talented. He was a drummer.
Thank you.
He was a drummer, and there were
I'm
times.
I'm not doubting that he's talented. I'm just pointing out that it's a low bar to set.
It is a low bar.
It doesn't give you really context to his actual ability.
That's fair enough, and my feelings aren't at all hurt. He was the drummer and would sometimes ask to be like, guys, can we play like a Led Zeppelin song or a Tool song? And I'd be like, look, man, you can nail John Bonham just fine. I'm not Robert Plant. My voice doesn't do that. It doesn't go that way.
I would like to see that though. At least the attempt.
Maybe we can put a video.
No, I think he's saying he would like to see you try Robert Plant.
Oh, no,
Kent
you
does
wouldn't.
Robert Plant.
That's a bad idea for everybody.
But maybe a good idea.
Yeah, but I mean,
No, I'm not doing it. That was one thing we did. We were also in a terrible rap group. We weren't good. Called not Born and Raised. That's a podcast called Boys Rule.
I had limited involvement in Boys Rule.
That's
I felt like a satellite member.
You're a featured artist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
he's a part of the entourage for sure, though.
Yeah. This is going to be probably the part where we will cut in a clip of a Boys Rule song.
Hey, we in it to win it. There ain't no other way to spin it. I teed it up and you hit it. I gave you a bite and you bit it. I gave you a taste of the shit and you spit it back out in the Polly's face out of that mouth. Ain't no black cloud painting over that sound. Proud as can be that you made these other jumps tap out. Cause normally I go with the flow, but this was too slow. Gotta come in and give this rap a quick jolt.
Around the time when we were in Boys Rule mode, recording songs in the basement of the house that we lived in, was around the time that you started at Vol Rumor Mill on Twitter. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how that started, and we're going to kind of go down the line on how you can track beginning that to where you are now. So tell me a little bit about what those early days of trying to gain traction with some rando Twitter account that people hadn't heard of before you hit the scene, and what that looked like.
So that was 2013. Late 2012, early 2013.
It was November 2012.
Thank you.
I checked. I did my research.
Well, it's really funny because you and I had just worked in New York for a summer.
Yeah.
And came back. So a lot of us, I think all of us who had jobs had quit them to go work in New York. And I remember I would wake up in the mornings and I would immediately get on my computer. I would make a cup of coffee, get on the computer. I'd turn on sports radio and I'd start sifting through oh, what could my next job be? And trying to think, we got back in, I think it was September, right? We got back and the season started. And so that whole leading up to November, I remember thinking to myself, man, I really enjoy sports radio. Like, I wonder if I could do that. I would listen basically all day as I'm searching for jobs, because if you've ever searched for jobs online, it's also a huge waste of time, but it's a lot of that time wasted. And so the coach at Tennessee, Derek Dooley, gets fired, and it's Knoxville. It's the smallest big town, biggest small town, whatever you want to call it. Everyone kind of knows everybody or knows somebody who knows everybody.
And people are hungry for any breaking information.
And it doesn't matter what level of quote-unquote society you are. Like, unless you know, you want to know. And so I had a bunch of different friends who had different connections with other friends or, a source themselves. And I remember sitting in the living room, and I kept getting all of this information because people knew how much I love Tennessee football. And I was like, man, I really wish I had a place to spill it without being identified and the sources dry up. And I think there was an account that I never really read. I don't think I ever clicked a tweet or a link, but it was called the Football Rumor Mill. And I remember thinking like, it's kind of a catchy name. It's kind of...
That account doesn't even exist anymore, right?
No, I think they closed a year ago, maybe. And so I remember starting to think like, oh man, should it be like a coach parody account or an athletic director account? And then I remember thinking like, those things are always so fleeting, because an athletic director gets fired and everyone hates him, or a player does something stupid or whatever. And so I was like, just do Vol Rumor Mill, easy. And I started it, and I think I sent the first tweet, and then... Keep in mind, like, I wanted to kind of get into sports radio. I never really, as I'm doing this, was thinking, this will turn into that.
You didn't have like a set plan of like,
not at all.
I do the Twitter thing for 2 years, and then I'll be able to start applying for radio jobs.
Right. In year 3, we convert to revenue, and there's a monetization model.
The business plan, the pro forma did not exactly exist. And so, but I wanted to kind of, if this makes sense, do sports radio. I just didn't have an avenue. I mean, it was 2012, so there were some podcasts, but it's not nearly as accessible to make them.
Sure, yeah.
As it is now, or then as it is now. And so I kind of wanted to have, and I started with zero audience, none. But I knew people would be searching, Tennessee or football or coach or search. So I just popped one out there, based on some of the stuff I'd been hearing.
This is tweet 1.
Tweet 1. I really don't remember what it was. Probably something about Gruden. And
it's always a good place to start.
No, but it was amazing because even with having, again, no followers, no nothing, after the first night, I had, I don't remember what it was, like 20 interactions, and I had gained 15 followers. And I remember thinking, whoa, that was a way bigger number than I expected. And I remember over the next few months, as I kept getting information and sharing information, and I never lied. I always reported what I heard. Like, I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying here's what I heard. Right. I never fabricated anything. I'm not saying again it was true, but it was amazing to watch that number just keep going, and it just made me realize how, again, as Kent said, how hungry people are for this type of information. They probably don't care if it's true or not. They just want to have something to believe in.
That's exactly
it's the
right.
drama of it.
Yeah.
It's not even like what is actually out there that's reportable. It's like, what are people saying might be happening?
Right. What are people saying, and which one of those is going to make me feel good?
Right.
The fastest, the most. And so,
which makes Big J journalists, I'm sure, just like
furious.
Cringe at the thought.
Furious.
Yeah.
And I would imagine going back now, that's probably why I've had some, not a lot, but I've had some media beef in this town, and it's probably because
I've got this on my notes. I wanted to get into some of that.
You started an account to spread rumors, and I was like, yeah. It's in the title. It's at Vol Rumor Mill. Like, I don't shy away from this, but that's the point. People want to have rumors to discuss. I mean, it's like
speculation. That's the whole news game now.
It's a new band, and when's the new album coming out? It's are these two bands merging and kind of disassociating themselves from people? It's just
it exists
rumor,
in the festival
conversation.
scene too. Like,
Yeah. Who's going to headline Bonnaroo? Yeah. Wait, who? Who's got night 2? It's
Dude,
people just want to speculate.
This year, rumors were rampant.
Well, they got Tool, so I'm good.
You got to go, man. You got to come with me.
I really do.
Well, and the promoters use them to their advantage. I mean, I've seen a lot of those rumor mills talk about, oh, well, Bonnaroo's about to sell out, and I mean, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but sure enough, a week later they did sell out. So like,
sure, people who are looking for just a festival, maybe they don't care. Oh yeah, we'll just go to Bonnaroo. It's the biggest one. We'll have fun. But most people want to know. I have these. These are my top 10 favorite bands. Are any of them? And if so, how many of them could potentially be here?
Right.
Like it's conversation. It's a distraction from the serious things in life, and I think that's what people search for.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into some of the friction between. Not necessarily specifically between the different competing football and sports talk.
Not the people, but the styles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the people, too, if you want. I don't care.
I'm not afraid of it. We've said plenty.
I listened to your show a couple days ago, and it was like a half hour of like the other station. And I was like, get them, guys.
That was a good day.
Okay, but so you started with this rumor mill, the Twitter account. How did that evolve? Like, what was the next step?
It kept growing and growing and growing, and there weren't a lot of people initially who knew. Like, this wasn't something I on my personal account was broadcasting. Like, hey everyone, I'm at Vol Rumor Mill. Go follow me.
Yeah, you kind of prized anonymity for a while, right?
Oh yeah, for a long time. I mean, probably the first year and a half, because I realized at that time, especially, some of the information I was giving out, if it was determined, because information and sources are very, very weird, because if one person knows something and they tell one other person, and then that person, it goes
they
public,
can track it back.
The link is
you
too
don't
close.
you don't want to be immediately found out,
right?
And so I tried to play it as carefully as I could. And then, I'm trying to think, you said that was November. I think I moved to Nashville that January, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. Yeah.
So, and I went actually to intern at a sports radio
when you
station.
worked with Gorman.
Yeah. So Steve Gorman.
Another music tie-in.
Right. Good point by you. So he's the drummer for the Black Crowes, and now it's Trigger Hippie. And so I moved to Nashville. I got an internship with Steve Gorman and my good friend Austin Huff, who I had never met. It was really funny. I went to a party. I met a guy. I told him what I was interested in. He's like, I know a guy. I meet Austin for coffee 2 days later. He hires me on the spot as an intern, and I'm working with the drummer of the Black Crowes. It was
on sports radio.
Yeah, he big NBA guy,
Okay.
Big Michigan fan, and what was also cool was because I played the drums, like I could keep up with him in drum conversations.
Yes.
So we would talk about Bonham, we would talk about Pert.
Yeah.
And, Steve and I mean, we still text to this day. Like, we have a really good relationship. And so it was this really interesting kind of worlds colliding, but also not.
Yeah.
Because I'm running the Vol Rumor Mill account in Nashville because I'm
Right.
still getting the information. I don't have to go every day to get it.
Right.
And so I could run this account while I was in Nashville doing sports radio, kind of learning what does the craft take, right? What are the, especially recording and computer systems and all that stuff, the basics basically when I first got there. And then I had been there I think I was only there for 10 or so months. And a friend of mine here he was also an intern at a radio station here. It was Tennessee Sports Radio at the time. Rest in peace. He kind of proved his worth. My friend Andrew, he proved his worth, and they gave him a Saturday show. I think it was an hour. And he didn't know which direction he wanted to go to do it.
That feels familiar.
Yeah, it's the theme of the day, really.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wasn't on the radio, but I was in a sports radio station. I was at 102.5 The Game for 8 hours a day. So I got to see... I would get there at noon and basically work through the evening show, which ended at 7, and then I'm there for another hour. So I got to see, it was really neat too, because I've got to see Gorman, who is a completely different radio host than George Plaster, who is very, if you want to say classical, traditional. The guy didn't even have a laptop. He would bring in a newspaper, which in modern sports radio, if you bring in a newspaper for the 4 o'clock show,
you're like 3
you're
cycles behind.
Yeah, you're out.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I got to kind of see all the different things that made George good, that made Steve good, that made Willie Donick good, and so on and so forth. And that was really neat. I still didn't have an end game. I think I moved back late summer. So after I got, fired from that, if you want to call it that, I guess my internship expired.
Sure.
Was the exact time that my friend Andrew had kind of gotten his way into Tennessee sports radio. So he calls me and says, "Hey, I got 2 hours on Saturday. Do you want to do a show together?" And I remember thinking, yeah, absolutely. So every Saturday for the next 2 months, I would drive home. I would either leave Friday or Saturday morning, drive home, record the show, and drive back to Nashville Saturday night for probably 2 months.
Do you think that Twitter account had any effect to that decision, like being able to get?
Yeah, we called the show The Rumor Mill.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Because I think somewhere in there I had finally kind of like outed myself or whatever.
I see.
Somewhere in that 9-month period.
Right,
Probably
yeah.
once everything died down and we had hired a coach and things were looking okay, I think I finally said, by the way, this is my real account, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, you
Right.
mentioned two things. That's one of the things. You mentioned two things in that story that I want to touch on and expand a little bit. One of them was you mentioned earlier, like, keeping anonymity for a little while when you first started out to protect sources. So you had sources, right? Mm-hmm. So you're doing the work of journalism, right? You're
Yeah.
actually like kind of you're on the
Yeah,
phone.
I wasn't talking to the guy like at the pilot counter who's,
Right,
you
yeah.
know, well, I heard,
You didn't
no,
hear
I had,
from old
I had
Terry
people,
up by the BP
exactly. I
what Gruden was going to do.
I at least felt like the people I was talking to, again, I'm not saying that they were necessarily correct, but I felt like they believed it.
Right.
I wasn't being told a story so that I'd run to my 0-follower Twitter account and spill the beans.
Yeah,
Right.
and knowing that it's entertainment and not necessarily like take everything I say as the truth. You have the freedom to be able to go with those rumors and be like, this is what the chatter is. And
Yeah.
also, I think every so often you did. I mean, you got. I feel like a lot of your biggest gains in organic growth were when you did get something right, and people were like, "This guy called it." Right?
It happened a lot.
Yeah. And during a coaching search, is there any better time?
No.
Yeah.
No. And, it would be kind of funny because there were a lot of times, especially early, where I would have 4 or 5 different things from different sources, and I'm kind of putting it together. I'm kind of piecing the puzzle together. I haven't gotten the answer to the equation, but I've gotten the question.
You're Charlie Day with the Pepe Sylvia map behind you.
But it was amazing, especially in that first year, how many times I would guess
right.
and say, well, I'm hearing this, and I actually think that this, and this, and that would happen, and the follower count would quadruple in a night. It'd go from 50, and you're up to 200.
You are Notre Damus.
Right, and that's ultimately
It's Crestradamus now.
Oh, yeah, that's
what we
right.
call me on
Okay.
the
He
show.
really does that.
Crestradamus.
Yeah, called Kentucky or called Tennessee beating Kentucky on Tuesday, right?
I did. I pretty much picked Kentucky or Tennessee to win every game, so the win over Kentucky was not like super crazy. But I did pick them to
Dude,
lose
don't pull back on it. Just take the credit.
No, I honestly thought they'd win that game, so I picked it. I mean, I haven't been right all the time, but
But that goes.
But when you're right, you're right.
That goes back to a point that I think is valuable across the board, and that is, so 2012 Twitter. That's like the golden era of Twitter.
Yeah.
It had only been on mobile for I think 2 years at that point. Growth was just like ripe for the picking there at that time, especially in the world of sports media. And a lot of times when a new medium comes out and people are successful on it, it kind of gets derided or shouted down as like not legitimate. It's like, oh, well, that's Twitter. It's not real life. We still hear that today.
sure.
And
And I think there actually is some legitimacy to that.
a little bit, sure.
That's a different conversation.
But the point being is that ultimately the medium itself is inconsequential to you having a space to actually let your work and talent shine through.
Sure,
And at the time,
sure.
Twitter was the perfect medium.
There were no barriers to entry.
No barriers.
You didn't have to have a microphone, a bunch of recording equipment. You didn't have to have a studio. You had to have a phone or access to a computer where you could type whatever the characters were then. What
was
it?
140
It was
at the
140
time,
at the time. I couldn't remember.
I didn't realize
You had
they
to be.
went up.
Oh, you had to be succinct. You had to be very like all of your data
Oh,
had
yeah.
to be like boom, boom, boom.
And you had to
couldn't-
use ampersands, and sometimes you had to mush words together.
This
And
was
just hope
before
that
the
people could
tweets.
decipher
You
it.
couldn't start a thread.
Yeah,
at this
threads are
point.
relatively new.
Retweets, it didn't even retweet with a box. It was just the
RT colon, right?
It was RT colon the quotation marks.
Yeah.
The actual words, no pictures, no nothing. I think they might even had pictures at the time.
Right.
I mean, you had to have good stuff, or there was nothing to
Those were the
make your
days.
content more clever with a GIF or a picture.
Right.
It was words only.
The same thing happens today. So in the music world, most recently, there's a great example, is Lil Nas X early on. He gained all of his fame through TikTok. And people were like, it's not even, it's this new thing, the kids like it, whatever. It's not even like a legitimate thing. And then fast forward to like 6 months later, he has shattered every record that Billboard has for music charts. And it's just like, it's a never-ending cycle of like this new thing pops up on the internet and people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's a fad. It's going to go away. And they do that at their peril because
Well, it's interesting because you say, it's just a fad, like there's something that sticks around these days.
Right.
Like people's attention span is so short. That's what we have.
No,
we have
that's why we
fads.
jumped from Twitter
Yeah.
to Snapchat to
Yeah.
TikTok
Exactly.
to Instagram to
Why
back
would
to
you
Twitter
leave
because
that money
Instagram
on the
got
table?
lame. Oh, they fixed the timeline. We're back. Yeah.
Yeah.
right, yeah. Yeah, you just described it like the time was that like a year and a half ago. That's exactly how it all went down. Yeah, and that's basically it. It's like if you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you're an entrepreneur, if you just find the medium that works best for you, and if you can get in at a time where it's growing, like do it. Get on there and just find a space that enables your talent, your passion to shine through. And that's kind of like the weird bridge here between like musicians and sports radio hosts. That's exactly what you did, and you kind of ran it quite beautifully, I must say.
I mean, you mentioned Nas X. Like, I think that's so interesting because the guy was creating music. He wanted to be on the radio, right? He wanted to
Right.
be on Spotify and Apple Music. That's
Yeah.
where he wanted to be. But he started on TikTok
Started on TikTok.
because he couldn't break through in another avenue. It was the same with me. I couldn't break through on sports radio. You can't just walk up to a sports radio station who's been around for 50 years and say, "Hi, I would like to talk on the radio." You've got to
One
kind
show,
of prove
please.
it somewhere else. You've got to prove that you
Exactly.
have the ability to captivate people, whether that's 20 people, 500 people, 5 million people.
Right.
You have to, and sometimes those different voices eventually merge together, and that's, in my case, that's exactly what happened.
And you already answered the very next question I had, which was when it came time for you to apply at Tennessee Sports Radio, like how valuable was it when you got to point to this account and be like, this is how good I am at being able to build organic growth and engage an audience?
It is easily, without question, what got me a conversation. I think a lot of people, once they meet me, they're like, "Oh, good dude, trustworthy dude." But without that, no, like there's nothing.
Yeah.
Like there's no. It's like, oh, well, what can you tell us about him? He's a really nice guy. He likes football.
It was your
That's the
it was your
entire
resume.
city here. Like that's
Right,
that's everybody.
You described Knoxville,
And
Tennessee,
so to
basically.
be able to show, oh no, he's built, I can't remember what it was at the time. It had been a few months, so maybe 8,000 followers. He's built this in basically no amount of time. That's 8,000 more people that could get our link to our radio stream or our podcast or vote in a poll, whatever it was. And so absolutely that got me the conversation. And then I think at that point, my ability to kind of show and explain how that would be beneficial also helped. But
Sure.
yeah, without starting that account, I wouldn't say 0% chance, but it would have, I mean, it was a marginal number at that point.
Yeah. So kind of fast forward, you and Durago did the Saturday show, and then from then straight on to the producer spot on the Ain show?
Yes. So I had been doing that, and I suppose my boss Jason and Eric, to a degree, had probably listened and heard and thought, "Oh, this guy's he's not bad. He's available in the mornings." And so they asked me if I wanted to do it, and I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And so at that point, I was the producer for the Eric Ainge show with Ainge and Bailey, and then slowly I became a guy who, instead of just pushing buttons and making sure the mics were turned on and answering phones and picking music for the bumpers, which is another music tie-in, I had a role on the show.
And then from then, I think after that, it was you and Reed Carringer on Evening Drive Time.
Evening
right?
Drive on RTI. Reed and myself had done our podcast at RTI for a while. Our bosses and the owner of the station worked together, and so we went from doing a podcast whenever we wanted to every other day to, I believe it was the 3 to 6 slot on the same sports radio. Again, the AM station was the same. It just wasn't obviously the same name.
Right. And now you're on morning drive time with Fox Sports Knoxville, Nate Hodges.
Yeah. So Nate did a show on the weekends at 1180. And because I was a producer, I knew how to, again, press buttons and turn mics on and pick music. And they did a fantasy football show. I think it might have been 2 hours right before, the NFL games kick off. So I did that. So me and Nate got to be really good friends. And in just this weird cosmic thing, once the station goes down, he leaves and starts doing his own thing. He had fallen in love with the idea of radio and conversation and sports, and he was going to go actually basically start another station while I'm at RTI. That fell through, so he decides to start his own. Like, he was going to start a station for another guy, and he was going to essentially be the GM. So then he decides, I'm going to start my own station, comes and talks to me, and at that point, I had just left RTI, so I'm like, yeah, because I'd always really appreciated and respected Nate, just the type of guy he is, and now I've been doing the morning show with him for 3-4 years.
Yeah. And it is one of the most listened to sports radio shows in this market, right?
Let
me say yes.
I mean, I
It's
guess
yes.
1 to 100 are all some of the most listened to. No, but yeah, we do well.
I think it's probably like one of the two, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
What was it like? We just went through a coaching search not too long ago. I got to experience it. I would say a casual fan. I've always been a UT fan, but not nearly as involved. Kent probably could speak to that, but I'm friends with Kent, who's also friends with you, and so I got a free ride on this coaching search, and man, was it exciting! It was fun. It was just fun to watch the rumors fly and people. I mean, the drama of it. What was that like?
So the first one was exciting. This one was
defeating.
Yeah, it was everything, right? Like, it was exciting. It was hopeful. It was defeating. It was captivating. It was nauseating. I mean, you name it. And I was so thankful to be at a place where, I mean, our show is a little bit different. A lot of shows in the, again, I was mentioning Plaster earlier, the classical sports radio world. It's here's what happened, and here's who led the score. Oh, and in this game, there was we don't really do that.
Right.
Especially when it's about Tennessee, because we're all invested.
Right.
We're getting so close to the thing I've been wanting to talk about the most in this interview.
I don't know what that is, but I'm kind of excited.
Ooh.
But I just love so much being able to have a platform, a space, a 3-hour window every morning where, going back to when I first started the Twitter account, where what I'm hearing can be expressed, to what I'm feeling can be expressed, and then to interact with those who are feeling either exactly the way I am, somewhere in the middle, or completely opposite of the way I am. It was fulfilling. It was great.
The first one, you had an anonymous account.
Right.
So there was a certain amount of trust. What changed in that process in terms of like trust with the people you were talking to? Did you have to learn a new game when this coaching? Because like when you're talking on air, they're aware that it's you. And
yeah, I think at this point, after again talking with some people that I was talking to, and some people would say, "Hey, I've heard this, but I heard it from the guy. Like, please don't share it."
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff you get, and especially I guess because people kind of knew what I had done before. Man, if they heard anything, like, they were going to be like, "Oh my gosh, if I say this, Houston might say it." So I got a lot, and a lot of it was, contradictory. And so I would kind of fish out, okay, that doesn't really make any sense. I would start to question more, whereas initially I would get info and I'd be like, "Oh my God, thank you, this is amazing." Whereas this time, the second time around,
you had to access
I'd get
filter.
Information, and this is like the real reporter work. It's like, okay, well, where did you hear that? Oh, my friend, whatever.
You get leads and you follow them up.
Yeah, you have to trace them back.
Right.
And a lot of times, I would figure out that it was bogus or that it was like a message board, whatever. And so I am not journalistically trained. I am not reporter 101, but I guess just through doing it the first time and knowing it was about to happen again,
You had experience.
I realized, especially with my name now tied to it, right? I had to be more careful, more suspicious of people maybe just feeding me junk.
Right.
Because the worst thing in the world is to, especially in this day on social media, is to be fed a bogus, complete lie and run with it as the truth, because it's not the person who lied to you who gets blamed for it.
Right.
It's you for believing it and running it as truth.
Right.
So I never wanted to be that person.
We saw that in this last coaching search. I remember.
Oh, it played out in stark contrast. In this
Right.
last coaching
I think I watched WBIR.
All the people who hated us our first year,
We're getting there.
our first 2 years on
Bring it
the
home.
station for what we would say and what we would do. Oh,
Yeah.
rumor. All of those people got caught in the bear trap of running with something that was not true, claiming it as fact, while we just sat back and watched the chaos ensue.
I can't remember because I don't follow this group close enough, but I do remember watching someone, I don't remember the character, breaking a coach on air.
Jimmy Himes.
Was it Jimmy Himes?
It was Jimmy Himes.
And then literally reading on Twitter, nope, that's not true. Here's the real, it flipped while he was like announcing it.
I'm not kidding. It happened to every one of the people in town, be it station or singular personality, who tried to essentially dunk on the brand new station. Because the station I work with now, I went there 2 months after they got on air. Like I was in, maybe not on the ground floor, but we weren't quite to the first floor. Right. I wasn't in the basement, but I definitely got in there before we got to the first floor. And so it was amazing because everyone in this town, and I'm sure all cities are like this, the new thing comes in and you're immediately, wait, no,
Yeah.
this is my street
This is
corner.
exactly
You will
what I
not
wanted to get
step in on this. And like, I get it. Like, we weren't former football players. We weren't former, television news broadcasters. We hadn't managed sports departments at 12 news stations across 6 states in the last 40. Like, I get it. Like, we were new.
But you found your own brand.
We found our voice and what we wanted to be for those who want to listen to us. And I would say our station's not for everyone, and I totally get that.
And this is something that is super relevant. Another one of those things that's relevant across the board, and it's old guard versus new guard way of thinking. And it's the reason that those kind of like older, more established big J journalists, if that's what you want to call them, you guys did not ask anybody permission. You went around the current gatekeepers, and you just do what you do as hard and as fast as you can, and leave them to try and catch up. And it's
and you do it authentically, like what I was saying.
We're not. It's not a show, if you will. It may become that in certain situations.
But what I'm saying is, like, the reason I relate to your show is because I'm a fan and you guys are fans. Like, you talk about these guys who say, well, I was a football player. I was in this. That's great. I mean, I'm sure that adds to the qualifications of what allows you to do this job. But from a relational standpoint, I can't really relate to that because I never played football, but I enjoy watching it.
Sure.
And I can connect,
and rooting and enjoying or being sad
with
afterwards,
fans,
right?
And so watching a fan get excited and having that passion on air, like, that's something that's unique that everyone said before, well, we can't have that on air. We have to have qualified.
No, yeah, it has to be factually driven and no emotion and just here are like I said, here's the box score from no one wants that.
And along with the theme of like just start, right? How easy could it have been for you in that basement at our old house in 2012 to be sitting around thinking, I'd really like to do something in sports radio. And then just ultimately being like, well, people go to school for that. And I didn't go to school for that. I'll just find something else. And you just didn't have to. You just like decided, you know what? I'm going to give something a shot. And then kind of the snowball started rolling. And then all the things that we've laid out of different shows that you've hosted and you going from this place to that place and this show to that show, you're describing a career path. Mm-hmm. But you didn't enter it in the way that most people think that you have to enter a certain career path. And that is really the theme, I think, of all of this that we're trying to get at.
Yeah, one of the biggest benefits for me, and I realize that this is not the case for everybody. I totally understand it. Our living situation was unique, but it was affordable.
Yeah.
We had just gotten back from New York. We had worked a summer.
It's a perfect
I had
lesson
more
for bands,
money,
too.
and I had more money in my bank account than I knew what to do with. That really doesn't matter to get to my final point, but I was in a position at the time where there was nothing else that I had to worry about. A current job. I was single at the time. I mean, it's hard to move to New York for 3 months and move back, and so
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of things where that would scare me, I guess is the best way to say it. I didn't have a lot of fear of, oh, well, what if I do this and it doesn't work out? Then how will that affect what I'm currently going through over here? I had the freedom and the headspace to sit for a while, weeks at a time, and then one day it just kind of hit me of what I wanted to at least try to do. And it all just kind of happened organically and very luckily in a lot of ways. But I think this is going to sound awful, and I apologize.
Don't.
Steve Harvey
Yeah.
has
gonna be awesome.
First of all, Steve Harvey, whether you like him or hate him or think he's funny or not, like I totally get that. Some of the videos he does away from the production cameras where he's filming himself, there was one I watched, and this has been since obviously all this started. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago, where he's talking to basically anyone, and he says the hardest thing I ever did was to just jump into what he wanted to do. And
He's a man full of wisdom.
he really is. And he likes bass fishing, so I'm in. But I thought, and I guess kind of already done it, but I think it's so true. It's really hard to half-ass anything, and especially if you're going to half-ass a lot of things. And I'm not saying everybody who does it ultimately succeeds and,
Sure,
and
of
does but I do think it is very, very hard to be completely satisfied and successful in any type of endeavor unless you can, for whatever amount of time, devote 100% to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another great lesson for bands. A lot of the biggest struggle that bands starting out have, if music as a career is ultimately their goal, is like, what do I do to provide for myself
In the
meantime, while we're starting out and like trying to gig around and go on like a 1 week tour, getting paid like $100 a show.
And that's why I was saying I was lucky. Like I had some time.
Well,
where
you were and you weren't. You made the decisions to go work like 80 hours a week for 4 months and then come back and kind of have a nice nest egg to allow you to kind of
some time,
to try
I guess,
out some of these things.
And I guess I understand that that's not necessarily available for everybody.
Sure, of course.
But I do think that, and especially my situation, and I think a lot of situations, that time afforded solely to, and when I first started, I didn't know what I wanted to do. It took me a minute. But a lot of people know what they want to do,
right,
and they just don't think they can, or they don't think it would work out. And for me, at least, and I think to all of those people, I would say it may not be perfect, and it will be hard, and it may not succeed, but the only way you'll ever know and trust yourself that you know is to do it.
And give it your full effort.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I was looking at both of our Twitter accounts. I looked at when you started yours because I had a memory of being inspired by you starting Vol Rumor Mill.
It could have been that long
Your
after, was
account,
it?
meaning
to start Knoxville Music Warehouse.
Right.
And kind of how the years go by and the timelines get fuzzy. And I was like, yeah, but I feel like it was like a ways down the road when I actually got started going. So yours began November of 2012. I looked at mine, the Knox Music Scene Twitter account. It was like February of 2013. So pretty much a direct result of watching you have this success at a time, frankly, when I was like, what's he doing with this? What's the Twitter
I got
account
that a
gonna
lot,
do? I know
right?
you
Where
did.
it's like, okay, Twitter.
And I
account,
felt, I still have a serious amount of regret for being one of those detractors. I don't think I was very vocal about it at the time, but
you weren't a hater.
No, of course not. But I did I had that in the back of my mind. But then watching you actually pull it off, I was like, well, why am I not trying to do something? So I did the same thing. I just got started. It didn't have nearly the same kind of organic growth as your Twitter account, but it was enough to get started, certainly. And we wouldn't be here in this room recording this podcast because I have a similar story of like this thing to this thing to this thing to this thing to where we are today.
Well, I think that, and again, I don't recall that attitude being directed towards me, but I think a lot of people, especially people who have a desire to do or create or be something maybe more than they are at the given time.
Yeah.
They see someone else starting something, and that initial response, because you've told yourself that,
exactly
is,
That's
that'll
exactly
never
my
work.
point.
Why are they wasting their time? This poor person. Come on. But really, that is the exact attitude you kind of have to have. The person on the other side saying, I'm just going to do this, and yeah, maybe it'll go down in a ball of flames and fine.
Right.
But there's also a chance that I get on TikTok and the next thing you know, I've sold more albums than anybody.
90% of the things in life, especially in the industries we're describing, there's no clear qualifications to start.
Right.
Like if you have to be a doctor, clearly you have some qualifications you need. But I think people oftentimes go, well, there's some boxes I'm not even aware of that I need to check before I can start this. And the truth of the matter is that you just need to go.
In that regard, there's nothing along the way you can't learn. Because I think I can speak for the three of us when I say we're creatives.
Sure.
Yeah.
So making stuff, whether it's events or audio, music, and by audio I mean obviously a podcast or a radio show. Like there's no prerequisite to that. You don't have to go to creative school. Like right. Some people are just born that way. And in fact, a lot of the other stuff that we tried to learn during college is really difficult or foreign to us because we are creators, we are builders.
Yeah.
And like I completely agree with that.
And in the coming months, I'm sure that a lot of the questions that I had to answer were a lot of the same ones that you had to answer or not answer and ignore. Like, I mean, like a lot of really awkward conversation at Thanksgiving with my extended family. I'd be like, wait, what are you doing? How is this a job? What are you selling? And
I lived in Nashville for 6 months and went home for Thanksgiving, and it's like, okay, so what's your new job paying you? I'm like, well, I've been an intern, so nothing. They're like, you live in Nashville? I was like,
yeah, and you don't necessarily have to.
And that's one of only about 1,000 conversations where it's
right.
like, oh gosh. Ugh.
You don't necessarily have to ignore all of that unsolicited advice from family members and friends or whatever, but you do kind of have to have your own idea of how this thing works.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take input, but ultimately you can't let people saying that they don't think that you can accomplish something dictate your actions of whether you think you can accomplish something.
I think it's important as you start any of this stuff is to establish your own perspective of what success and failure is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, if you look at like, oh, I interned and made $0 and then they fired me, some people might go, well, I failed, I need to get out.
I was one of their best interns ever.
That's
according
true.
to the guy who fired me. And then he fired me after paying me $0. He did buy me lunch occasionally. I will give him some credit. Like I got some Jersey Mike's out of it.
But that was a success. The experience itself was what you acquired.
I look back on my time at that radio station, 102.5 The Game, with my time with Steve, with Austin, with Jeremy, with all the people I met, and I 100% say that was a time that was good and that I needed and that I appreciate.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is a success, and if someone else decides to call it a failure, you can't allow yourself to buy into that stuff because
you're there every day. So how it makes you feel matters. And whether you're a musician or wanting to get into pot, like if you do something and you like it, and then people who maybe don't understand what you're doing are kind of, oh, this is not really a good, like, man, just like keep pressing into that because, again, not all the time, but a lot of times, like you find a niche or you find your voice and you find an avenue where you grow and you expand and you become more and more and more. Your audience grows and then it makes sense. And I get it, man. Like everybody, especially parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, like they want you to step out of college. They want you to go right into a starting job with $65,000 a year and medical and benefits and a car. And I totally get that. Like I would want that for my kid.
Right.
Yeah.
That I don't have. I'm just saying if I had, I would want that. But everyone's path is just not that.
Sure. Yeah, and while you were going through that in Nashville, I was here. My whole business plan, you can't see that I'm doing air quotes, was that I'm gonna start a local music blog, and it's gonna generate enough traffic to get ad sales that are going to be my income. That was my plan, and saying it out loud now is the most ridiculous thing. And by every possible,
Real quick,
Yeah.
remember what you said about me?
Yeah.
And how you thought about what I was doing? How
I know.
There were times where I thought the same
Of
about
course.
you. Like, he's like, ad sales. Like, ooh.
And
But it's amazing because I never told
You
you, like,
weren't
Kent,
wrong.
you're an idiot. But, like, having done it myself, I realized, like, he thinks it's going to be that.
right.
But it opens doors for it
You
to
can
become
pivot to
something completely
else.
different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got to
And
be able to pivot.
so by every possible metric of what a normal person would describe as a success or failure in a business venture, Knoxville Music Warehouse was a giant failure. It made me no money. It took up so much time. It was more than a full-time job while I was trying to hold another full-time job. And but the money of it wasn't the thing. It was the experience and the relationships that
Exactly.
I built. It was what got me and Garrett to start working together. It got me my first gigs in booking music, and all of that has turned into what Born and Raised is, and it's a much more solid.
Well, and you
business plan than a
earned
local music
something
blog.
at Knoxville Music Warehouse. When I moved back here from Nashville, I recognized it's something you can't buy, which is cultural credibility. You can't buy that. You
Right.
can't go out and go, I want everyone to trust me. Like, that's not something you can just purchase. And you earned that through Knoxville Music Warehouse, and you found through Born and Raised a way to leverage that. People trust your opinion on music. And I mean, that's something that you have to like find on your own, you know?
Yeah, and again, theme of the show. Like, you start off, you maybe don't know where this whole thing is going to lead, but just getting started can get you so much value that you may not even realize you're getting. If it doesn't come in form of revenue, if it doesn't come in the form of, I don't know, whatever else you would define as a success, there are other things that the experience can make you better for and can ultimately lead to other things. You never know how it's going to turn out.
Well, and that's an interesting point, I think, because you started it with one idea in mind, and that's what you thought you wanted to do.
Right.
Would you say you're enjoying what you do now?
I was never really a journalist. I was never really a music writer. I've always been a promoter. Like, even in the blog posts that I was writing, they were never like long dissertation critiques of local bands. Like, it was always just like, hey, this band kicks ass. You should listen to them.
You mean Pitchfork wasn't knocking on your door?
I specifically said that it was the anti-Pitchfork. I hate the idea of editorializing and saying that any music is bad, and they do it all the time, because I was like, if it's bad, I just won't include it. What is the value in
Right.
pointing to something that
There's
you don't
plenty
think
of
is
there's
good?
plenty of noise out there. You don't need to point out
People
noise.
will know if it's bad.
Yeah.
But they may not have seen it and know if it's good.
Yeah, but
So
the
that's
point is, the whole time I was basically just promoting other bands for free, which was fine. I love doing it, and I think that's what really built a lot of my relationships with local bands, because they're like, hey, this guy's just kind of trumpeting our stuff and being like, these guys are good. You should listen to them. I like that he's saying that. And yeah, I mean, it all basically, all along, I was a promoter, and it just was a matter of time before we pivoted to that.
And I mean, I think that's the same with a lot of people. Some people want to be a musician, and then they realize, okay, maybe I'm not at the level of that, quality that I need to be, but I'd be a damn good band manager.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Happens all the time.
They
Yeah.
have it-
and I don't mean this derogatory, but
Yeah, you're describing Garrett now.
the drum tech for Danny Carey of Tool is a great drummer.
Yeah.
He's no Danny Carey,
Yeah.
but he's making more money being the drum tech for Tool than he would ever be as a drummer himself. So sometimes stepping into what you love, even if you're not sure where in that thing you want to be,
yeah.
will lead you to that spot.
Right.
So many people involved in the music industry, from booking agents to tour managers to band managers, are all just former musicians that were like, you know what, the lifestyle, touring all the time, not really right for me. So I'm gonna help support somebody else who actually is about that lifestyle.
Right.
And that's kind of us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say so.
Yeah. Last thing that I wanted to get back to about where you are now at Fox Sports, and back to the old guard versus new guard conversation. Like, Fox Sports has a couple guys that kind of did a similar path as you, and you guys are like this. I feel like the outside perception is that you're like this merry band of misfits. It's like you're Robin Hood and his merry men. Like John Reed, for example, kind of like his thing was like, what? Did he start the Reed's Ranch podcast first and then got a radio show?
It was close. What really started for him was taking his shirt off and doing wrestling promos before Tennessee football games.
Amazing.
But that's the thing. Like people see that and they think, "Oh, this is a dumb redneck
a buffoon,
who is just
basically,
loud and a fan of wrestling."
John's actually super smart.
He's incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
Like he's smart enough to know when to dumb it down and when to play the game.
Right.
And that's the difference.
But my point and the whole reason I wanted to bring this back up was because like most of the guys, if not all, probably all of the guys at your station right now kind of either started or at least once they got on have this thing about them where they're building organic engagement. Like you guys probably don't have the same wide listenership and support as say the Sports Animal because they're this well-funded behemoth and they get to call themselves the flagship for the Vols or whatever.
Where the Vols play.
Yeah, exactly. But you guys have been pounding the pavement building actual lasting relationships with your listeners, and your support goes much deeper. Right?
That's why we named it Fanrun Radio.
Fanrun Radio.
We were
exactly.
Fox Sports Knoxville for the first year and a half, 2 years, and we kind of sat back and said, like, what are we? And I remember the meeting. It was me, John, Russell, Nate, and there may be a few other people in there. And we were just trying to decide, okay, if next month Fox says, we're canceling all radio across the country, no more affiliates, what would we be?
Yeah.
And that's why we realized at that point, we have a brand. We didn't know what it was at the time.
Right.
But what is it that we do? And so we sat and just talked about what is it about us that makes us different, that makes us not a Fox Sports affiliate, but our own thing. And that's exactly what it was. It was the fact that John Reed has his fans that he's engaged with. And there's a lot of overlap between them, but Russell has his, I have mine. Every personality at the station has theirs, and then we bring them all together. It's this, as you were saying earlier, I don't necessarily want to hear a former football player talk to me about football when he moved here for college, was here for 4 years, then moved away and is now back looking for a job. I want to hear what people like me are saying. And so that's what we realized. Like, we're a voice for the fans. We are communicating with the fans. We're interacting with the fans, but we're also just fans ourselves.
Exactly. And always bringing it back to the overall points that, like, any musician or entrepreneur can, like, building a community and engaging with that community is so incredibly important, especially for musicians right now, because building a huge, wide audience is much harder to do anymore, but you can reach a certain number of people. And then once you deeply connect with them, like, how important is it to you guys with how dedicated your fan base is in, say, getting sponsorships or using merch as a revenue stream?
Immeasurable.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that, and this ties back, for us, for anybody before us who did sports radio, if you're listening on your, you could call in, I guess, but if you're listening on the radio in your car, there's no, like, immediate response variable here. It is, I'm listening, I'm told the stuff, I have my opinions, and I go. Like, it's not always the exact medium in which your product exists that you will build that community.
Right.
Like, my goal was to get to radio. My community that is now on the radio, I brought from Twitter. Like,
sure.
Nas X brought them from TikTok.
Right.
And go on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredibly important to be building community, because if you get 1,000 super fans, like, say you're a touring band, for example, you get 1,000 super fans willing to buy a record when they come see you play live.
Yeah.
Or to wear your T-shirt and be an ambassador for your music. Like, that's a huge, huge advantage that you have that you can lean on when you need them. So I think you guys have done an incredible job of that. That specifically, you guys are really, really good to your listeners and do a lot of events and are really engaging and are willing to take it to the Twitter fingers and get into debates and discussions, and sometimes they disagree, and that's fine.
Oh yeah,
But-
and that's the whole thing for us. Like, if someone disagrees with
People
you,
just want to be heard.
yeah,
and
exactly.
You guys listen to
They
them.
want a voice. They want an opinion.
Yeah.
And so I may read it on the show and say, yeah, I kind of disagree with this, but I mean, I remember what it was like for me to get a tweet read on the air. Like, it was
Yeah.
kind of a big deal. It felt motivating. It
Right.
felt like, wow. And even if that person disagreed with me, I was like, yeah, maybe, but my name was just on the.
They're in the club. They're part of the family.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's an incredibly important lesson for anybody starting off on any kind of independent venture, whether it be a band or an entrepreneur who sells like picture frames or something. I don't know, whatever it is. Incredibly important to build community.
Where can we dial in to listen to this show?
Well, if you're in Knoxville, it's 1340 AM, 1057 FM, fanrunradio.com.
And you can listen on the website as
Oh,
well?
yeah. We also have a free app. It's free.
Ooh.
The free app is free.
Is it free? It sounds like it's free.
How much
free,
does
free,
the free app
free.
cost?
It is free.
What commercial is that? Free.
Just-
Is that Comcast?
I don't know.
What would they have that's
I
free?
can't.
They're not free.
nothing. It's yeah. That was a horrible. Comcast
Yeah.
free.
TurboTax.
It is TurboTax. Shouts out. And then the app is also just called Fanrun Radio.
Anything else that we maybe didn't get to that you'd like to add?
Do you want me to try to
open-ended?
dunk on John Pennington real quick? Or are you
Yes,
good?
Yes,
that's all
absolutely.
I've wanted this whole time. I forgot about Pennington, man. This probably won't air.
If
But
it does,
might.
it's fine. Like I don't. At
Maybe
this
we'll start a
point,
Patreon
I'm in a
and we can
private.
do all the shit
I'm in a
talking for our
private
Patreon
podcast
supporters.
dungeon. Like I have my freedoms. He's just the classic example of news guy, and I did it the right way. And the guy at the time did a 1 hour show 1 day a week, and we were doing 3 hours a day. I was producing and co-hosting when I first got there, and he just looked so far down his nose at us. It made me sick. And he would take what we talked about and then make them his show topics just so he could try to dunk on us. At one point on his show, he called us the deepest, darkest pit of AM radio for taking something I said completely out of context, even though it was right at the time.
Who coined millennial radio? Was that 990?
That was Ainge on the Feinbaum show.
Ainge.
Before one of the football games. Oh, the millennial. Like, they would never say our names because heaven forbid they say our names and people actually go and listen for
They don't want-
themselves.
Wait, it was Ainge?
Ainge said millennial
Ainge
radio.
is a millennial.
Is he?
Well,
though?
that's beef.
That's the irony. And
Yeah, he's
so,
only 1 year older than I
but
am.
Pennington was one of the guys earlier who said, I didn't want to believe it myself, but John Gruden is at Calhoun's. I repeat.
Oh, boy. What a day that was.
And of
man.
course he wasn't. And people are like,
It
wait,
was
you
just
get
like
onto this
another
guy
guy
for
that looked like him,
exactly
sort of.
from the back
From the
and like
back,
kind
yeah.
of to the side.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, you get on Duval Rumor Mill for tweeting out rumors, and you just said this and said it was a fact.
Yeah.
And
So
so
many-
he just, I don't think he said a word to us since then, honestly.
So many of the loudest detractors for you guys got things so spectacularly wrong in the last
Yeah, you
coaching
mentioned
search,
Jimmy
and
Himes.
It was amazing.
On ESPN, on
Listen,
Outside the Lines, which is the most serious of the ESPN
You have to
shows.
understand if I have seen Jimmy Himes messed up, that means he messed up in a big way. Because I'm not
You
really
said casual fan.
Right, he's a
yeah.
casual.
It's just like
Yeah.
the fact that I'm seeing these screw ups means that they're out there in a big way.
Well, and I'm not saying we've caused that, but a lot of people, again, just fans have said, the only reason
I would-
that they
I would
kept
say
messing that stuff up was because they were so shook by you
'Cause
guys
they need to be
that
the
they
ones to
had
break
to
it.
then beat you.
Right.
And so by trying to beat you,
Force them to make some
they
bad
actually
decisions.
went lower than you on the here's the rumor. They reported it as fact to make sure you guys didn't win.
Yeah.
Which is
And then they blew
always
it.
makes me feel so good.
Oh, Jimmy.
Like by trying to be us, they became so much worse than us, if that
Right.
makes sense.
well,
Well,
you
they
have to play your
stepped
own
in.
game. You have to play your own game.
And that's the thing. They don't know how to play on our
That's the
streets.
thing. You had
They
them
should
playing
know.
your
They
game.
shouldn't,
They
yeah.
stepped into an arena they weren't quite familiar with, and they got bit a couple
Some
times. for it.
say if you argue with an idiot, he'll bring you down to his level and beat you with experience.
You're
just
the idiots that brought him down.
I just like to call it home court advantage. Okay, it's home court advantage. We know these streets. These are our streets.
Yeah, those are the mean Twitter streets. We know them. That's amazing. Well, Houston, thanks so much for your time, man. This is episode 1. Well,
Thanks for being our guinea pig.
Yeah, glad to be the first.
Yeah, this is the standard we're setting. It's looking early returns are pretty good.
Hopefully, you'll be our first repeat too. That way we can
Cheers.
get you back on
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah,
Sign me up.
right on. Thanks, man.
Where you at?
I'm like the atomic dog, all I wanna do is chase a cat. All up on this track with Lil Hoochie, you know that's my dog, like Poochie. In the studio, you know we do it big up in here like Cujo. Like Fido, we Fido. You know my stilo, my credo. I solemnly swear to always rock the microphone, so let it be known I got my dogs with me. Cheetah cats, get in here, rock with me.